Welcome to the Bitcoin Suits podcast, where financial and tax advisors come together to explore the role of Bitcoin in modern planning and client services. I'm your host, Jordan Guess, a CPA and a Bitcoiner, working at the intersection of traditional finance and the future of money. Hey, y'all. This is Jordan Guess. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Bitcoin Suits podcast. Today, we have Joey Marty joining us from Satoshi Pacioli, an accounting firm that I guess they're not really based out of anywhere specific. Maybe they're based out of not the metaverse. I don't like that, but they're located all across the United States, basically. So, Joey, thanks for joining. How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. Happy to be here. I'd say if anything, we're based at some of the Bitcoin community hubs.
That's true.
So Joe and Seth are both at the Bitcoin Park in Nashville, and then myself and Michael are here at the space in Denver.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you've got people trickled in other corners, but we won't dox them. So, all right. So we got to know each other, I guess, fairly recently, right? Maybe in the last month or so.
Yeah.
But I've known Joe and Seth since January, since I joined up at the park down in Nashville. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about your background. I know you've mentioned that I think it's a little unorthodox, right? You didn't come from the general path that a lot of bookkeeping type of people come from. Is that right?
Yeah, completely. I've basically been doing bookkeeping since 2009, and working with small and medium-sized businesses. I kind of just learned through someone else that was doing bookkeeping as well. And kind of in this industry, you probably know as well that there's the higher level financials, and then there's the grunt work of the data entry. And before QuickBooks Online, a lot of it was just local on a computer running the desktop software, and you had to really manually enter data by data piece to get it in there. So usually as bookkeepers kind of get more attuned to the role, they kind of move up into higher portions and find people to help on the groundwork to kind of get the data into the system so they can begin to manipulate it and do financials. So that's kind of how I got in, was just very good at doing detailed work, making sure that things were correct as they were going in, and just kind of learning the system as I needed per client. And then I was also doing school at the same time. Get my undergrad in psychology, was moving my way towards being a naturopathic doctor. And then COVID happened, and then I found Bitcoin, and then I merged the two together of conventional fiat bookkeeping now with the Bitcoin world, which absolutely brought that passion back into bookkeeping.
That's great. And I remember you telling me too, prior to Bitcoin bookkeeping, you were doing a little bit of was it the type of bookkeeping was like marijuana bookkeeping, right? It was like not the traditional or at least as easy as pulling bank data, right? More cash. Yeah. And I mean, I only deal with that a little bit, and the cash stuff is extremely difficult to track and categorize correctly. So maybe talk us through a little bit about that. Did that come into Bitcoin world at all with the experience then versus what you do now?
Yeah, it totally has a lot of parallels. So it was in Southern California when cannabis was first becoming medicalized, moving its way towards legalization. And so there was a lot of medical dispensaries that, had physical locations selling medical cannabis to their patients. And so at the state level, they were legal and able to function as a business. But as we know, with the merchant processing side, that was completely controlled and unavailable to them. So they were cash-based businesses. Many of them, some of them moving from an industry that was not recognized, was more of the black market, working only completely cash-based, and then converting into more of a legitimate legalized business. And some of them just started up wanting to be a business owner, like the industry, and had no connection to the previous, I guess, black market industry. So legitimate business owners wanting to pay their taxes, but not necessarily maybe know how to do the accounting side of it and to figure all that out. So some of them were that side of it, lots of cash having to be counted, and even just do the normal fiat accounting. A lot of the parallels would be similar to the Bitcoin industry, is legitimized in terms of it's legal to do such a business, but socially it's kind of a faux pas. And so because you have that like disjointed nature, there's access or not to the banking industry, as we've seen of some of these crypto facing banks being shut down.
Yeah.
That's kind of more of the social layer. It's not actually illegal. It's not a problem, but it's just because of that social taboo that's around it. And so a lot of that would happen in the cannabis industry early on as well, where they had no access to the banking system, or if they did, they would always have to have multiple backups of other banks that they could fall back to once they knew that inevitably one of them might close them down and they would lose ability to be able to hold their cash. And so it just became very risky. But at the same time, they're just wanting to be legitimate businesses, to pay their taxes, to have things accounted for. But there's just so many bottlenecks and constraints and frictions that were caused in that. Let alone in my role, finding somebody that was willing to work with them in the industry, because of it caused a lot more headaches, right? It was a lot more
Yeah.
bookkeeping work to try and figure out the accounting properly. And then even do audits, like the IRS would like audit them for different things that were just because of the industry they were in. It had
Yeah.
nothing to do with their books themselves. And so myself and my teammate would essentially have to, like, hit that level of detail in every single aspect, showing it's a legitimate business, and then provide that essentially to the IRS to say, hey, you're wrong here. We accounted for everything,
It's
and
always a
this
good
is what it
feeling.
is. Yeah, exactly.
How did they, I guess last question on that would, how did they deal with the custody? I mean, was it just in a physical vault, the cash specifically, and people had keys or codes to get into that? And then how often were you all, like, were you all basically just taking their word on what was in the cash, uh, like what was in the vault at the end of the month, or were you all actually going in and counting, or were they counting? How was that working?
Because I was kind of more on the data entry side, I didn't see that side of it as much. But from what I remember from my partner, that she would have to do some of that physical counting of cash. A lot of it too was more like the invoicing side of it, like creating a proper strategy for them to be invoicing each and every customer and like tracking everything.
Yeah.
Because business owners don't think to do so unless they need to, especially when everyone's rushing to you to give you cash for this new thing that they can get in a store.
Yeah.
They just want to provide the product and sell it, and then realize, like, oh, you're running a business here. You need to track this through paperwork and all the way to the end, to the counting of the cash. And so that's usually would be a safe. And then yeah, and just that detailed work of doing like actual physical handwritten invoices is what it was at that time. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
dating myself on that. It
No,
wasn't really digital back then.
yeah. Well, we've come a long way, even in the last, I guess, 10 years, even since 2015, which is about when I got started. And I was in QuickBooks Desktop there for the first, call it 4 or 5 years. And that world looks totally different than where we are now with how everything's cloud based and the subscription model and all that kind of stuff. So,
Completely.
um, okay, so I think where I wanted to go next is, so all of that, I think, helps move you into Bitcoin, like accounting world, well. But then I feel like there's a ton more complexities in the role you're in now, based on, the marijuana business, just because the cost basis and the tax component of transactions, and tracking lots of the lots of UTXOs by cost base and all that stuff. And I know there's one, like, what I'm curious about is, I understand it on the tax side of things, the very pure gain and loss. But I wanted to understand more so from the bookkeeping standpoint. How are you all tracking, like, unrealized gain or loss on a monthly or quarterly basis for Bitcoin that's sitting on the balance sheet, and then also the realized gain or loss if there's ever Bitcoin that's sent or sold? And we don't have to get super granular, but I was just kind of curious how you think about that, because it seems like that's the most complex part. And correct me if you think that that's not the most complex part, but yeah, maybe just talk me through how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely adds another layer where if you're doing just the fiat side of things, it's easy to connect it if we're talking about QuickBooks or many other accounting softwares, like you can connect it to the API of the bank, and then transaction by transaction, it's just automatically flowing into the system. And you get to say like, okay, this goes there. Now it's in the system. It's moving forward. It's easy. It's easier to track because of that, because you have it just flowing in. You're not always waiting for clients to send you statements, or for you to get the statements yourself. Like, it's one less thing to think of, oh, where do I need to get the information to make this picture complete for that time period? And then on the Bitcoin side of things, it's like you have to really track that as to, are they using an exchange? Are they using some vault system? Are they doing self custody? Is it some address and not even a UTX or a XPub that you're following? So it really depends where it's coming from. That kind of takes another level, which I could see maybe why some accountants or bookkeepers like don't want to add that extra thing to a client plus multiple clients to have to track. But for the unrealized gains or losses, it's simpler than the realized side, just because if we know the balance that they're holding to Bitcoin, that stays stable until they spend, sell, or buy more. And usually they're going to be doing that through fiat. So we'll see that on the fiat side that they made a purchase in their bank account to that exchange, and then we'll know that there's some amount that is additional to what they had before. And then we can adjust for that. If it's not, then it's staying stable. Then it's pretty easy, basically month by month. We'll check what the price is or look at the statement that's provided and see what that US dollar variance is. And then we just make a journal entry adjustment for that US dollar amount to be able to adjust month to month to show that gain or loss. It gets more complex on the realized side because now you're having to, like you said, track the lots and compare it against what was bought, which ones were actually being sold, depending on the accounting method that's preferred or used. And that's where Anthony really made that a bit easier through that cost basis spreadsheet that we have on our website. Anybody can download it. Just go to the satoshipacioli.com, go to the blog section, and then there's a link on there for a cost basis spreadsheet that's built, basically has macros on the back end. It's built more for the export of Sparrow Wallet. So the all of the alignments on the data are basically an export directly from that. So it's kind of easiest to use it that way. Otherwise, you can manipulate it to work. But you basically just pop it into the tab that's for the data. You set it to whatever accounting method you use, and then it'll basically adjust that data according to the accounting method. And then you can see the different realized gain or losses depending on that. So that was honestly a game changer because a lot of that was very manual and difficult to follow. And then especially if people have Bitcoin in multiple places, it gets even more complex where you don't want to like accidentally count a transfer from one account to another as a sale when really it's just a transfer. But it's very easy if you're not looking at it correctly that you could see that as a sale when it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it probably doesn't make sense to go too deep in the weeds in like specific journal entries, but it's interesting. I think as other CPA firm owners and bookkeepers are listening in, and maybe they've got some clients who are asking about Bitcoin. I think it's interesting that potentially there's a referral source for Satoshi Pacioli because you all are experts in the space and you deal with this day in and day out. And everyone in the accounting world, we all do something very specific, right? And then we butt up against what we do or what we don't do, and then if we don't do it, we have a trusted referral partner. So that's an interesting thing. Are you all seeing a lot of other bookkeepers that are out there that are popping up and servicing the Bitcoin space, or do you feel like we're still early and maybe there's not a ton of market activity, so we don't need a ton of accountants, or is it actually you're seeing a ton of volume come through your all's door because there's not enough practitioners who are qualified and enthusiastic about doing Bitcoin bookkeeping?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixture of all of it, it seems like.
Okay.
I mean, definitely as of a year ago when I was going to just some of the Bitcoin meetups around the world, different events and stuff, not around the world, around the country, that like I didn't run into any other CPAs or bookkeepers. And so our brand became really well known because when I myself would go, or Joe, it seemed like there really wasn't that many others. But then this year, ran into quite a few at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas. Met two actually just last month at the conference. And before, like I said, it really wasn't meeting as much. It was more the customer side of like, oh, you guys are here, you guys do this,
Yeah.
great. Like I want to hop on board, because the common thing that I didn't expect when I first got into this role was clients coming to us and kind of just sitting and relaxing. They're like, "Oh, you're Bitcoiners. Like, we don't have to teach you about the money or the asset, or the
Yeah.
asset. Sorry, the asset or the network. Like, you understand what Bitcoin is. You've done the research similar to what I have for however many years, how many hours, and we can just dive into like my personal finances or my business finances, and like how do we figure out how this asset works along with what we're doing here, and be advised for that, where they may have came from." An experience with their current accountants that was more either misunderstanding, or outright shame of not thinking that they should be holding this asset. And so it's a very difficult place to be in if someone's advising you in that way when you believe differently.
Yeah.
And so it's very special to see people come to us and know that they could trust us because they're Bitcoiners as well. We see the same kind of future going forward. And then they have somebody that can advise them in that direction.
Yeah. Absolutely. One thing that came up earlier this week, actually, at a lunch I had with a guy, he runs some Bitcoin mining operations. And do you all work with many like Bitcoin mining operations?
Yeah, we work with a few.
Okay, I figured you guys did. So it was kind of something that I hadn't really thought a whole lot about. But what he was describing was this arbitrage between what it actually cost the Bitcoin miner to, actually what they had to spend out in dollar terms to get the Bitcoin, right? Versus, they get the fair value of whatever the Bitcoin is at the time. But it was interesting to me that he wanted to do a better job of tracking, basically, like if I'm putting in enough money, call it like $88,000, that's what I'm putting in to mine one Bitcoin. But when I mine a Bitcoin, I'm getting called 100,000. And so there's that arbitrage. And I was trying to think through if there was a good way, like, or what was the best way, I guess, to account for that. Because my head has always been, well, and I think about this more so from the tax standpoint. So I'm more, my thought process is you just recognize the revenue at 100,000, right? And then you've got your expenses. But do you all think about that or do any kind of analysis for a Bitcoin mining company to say, basically, here's a report showing the arbitrage that you're able to capture because here's what you had to pay for electricity, your machines, any other kind of expenses that go in, all the input expenses, and here's what you got out of it?
Yeah, I mean, this may be a better question for Joe since he kind of knows more of that high level financial side of it. But I know it's like is part of like many of them might be early startups, so they're like boots in the ground that they're not there yet to be able to consider those types of questions.
Right.
And then we're on the other side wanting to help to push to make them consider those types of questions too. But then there's also that void between the accounting software that we're all kind of using and its inadequacies.
Yeah.
And then having to take that next step to export the data and then convert it into something that's able to like show why it is and how it makes sense.
Yeah.
And because there's that gap, then it takes that extra effort to do so. So I think we're like moving towards that direction. Like, how do we make that more efficient and easier to do it? As well as even outside of that, how do we make the system do this for us so that we just have to put the information in there and then it could be industry specific and be able to pop out exactly all these different KPIs or data points that we're wanting to consider for each industry.
Yeah. No, it's totally true. I mean, I find it so much in my own practice that it's like there's all these great ideas of things that I would love to do for the client, right? And they would
Yeah,
probably pay me to do that as well. But I feel that we're in an industry that there's more work there than there are people to do the work, which is
100%.
a great job security thing, right? Um,
Yeah.
but it is also, it feels like that that meme of, you know, the person drowning and they're reaching out their hand and someone's just giving you a high five. So so it's always a balance, right, of like what's the highest priority thing that has to get out the door today or this week versus and we could even talk about the client advisory services that I know you all just announced. Will that make its way, do you think, into your realm at all, or is that more other team members at Pacioli?
Definitely Joe and Michael are spearheading that.
Okay.
I could see myself working towards that direction once we, I guess, don't have, or once we have more team that can like help with the bookkeeping side to like keep growing and scaling up the business.
Right.
Right now, I was basically like the first bookkeeper to join the team outside of Joe, who started the company.
Right.
And then we've got Anthony is on board that's helping as well. So I could see like as we begin to scale that up, that would be a place I would love to like move towards, being able
Yeah,
to
it's
do
very,
that side of it.
it's so important because I think the bookkeeping, what you were describing earlier, is like it has to be done for compliance and all of that kind of stuff. But it really is the lifeblood of the decision making that a business owner ends up making. You know, whether they do this or they don't do this is based off of the work that we as bookkeepers do for them. And so it's always surprised me that, you know, I think people tend to sleep on bookkeeping a little bit, but I think both of us know if you're in the weeds and you can see how it affects just the entire business as a whole, it's extremely important. And not only that, it's extremely important that it's accurate, which we can kind of get into. I'd be curious to know, obviously we've talked a lot about this kind of stuff off air, but I think it'd be helpful for some of the audience to understand, what does the tooling look like? What are you all doing on a day-to-day basis with the Bitcoin specific activity to ensure it gets into the accounting software, and then also ensure that it is accurate, just the debits and credits and getting everything in and reconciled?
Yeah, totally. I wouldn't want to scare people away that maybe Bitcoin hesitant on the accounting side of it. I find enjoyment in it because it's a new industry, and this is part of those growing pains. Is each and every wallet, each and every exchange, anything that's going to be handling Bitcoin has kind of decided their own method for exporting that data or not.
Right.
So some of it might be manual entry I've had to do off of a PDF that like wasn't even, you couldn't even copy and paste the text. It was almost just like a straight image of information. I'd say that's probably the worst one, where I had to kind of manually put that onto a spreadsheet.
Flashback to like 2012, probably.
Yeah, yeah, I was like, what is this? But yeah, at the same time, it's because of the client that I was working for. Like, I was happy to do it, and it was an interesting use case where I hadn't experienced that before, as well as a conversation to have with them, because they need the developers of like, we need to do better. Like, what are some other things you can do? Because this is now costing the client more money to have me do the work, because it should have been faster and easier. And so it incentivizes him to have these conversations with the developers to say, like, we need to make this better and easier for me as a business to be able to run my business. And I want to use your software, but like, this is what's missing from it. So we'll hope that changes into something else. For other ones like exchanges and stuff, a good amount of them are pretty good at making their statements better and better. Some of them have actually reached out to us to be able to ask us questions about like how they can make their statements better or make their exports better. And I basically just take that exported information and make sense of it, because everyone kind of puts it in different ways, to be able to take that in a way to where we can turn it into US dollars so that we can put it into the bank's financial software,
Yep.
so they can see it in US dollars. Um, and then over time, how do we make it more efficient so that if that exporting format stays the same from the various places they have Bitcoin, then I can have a spreadsheet that I can basically just keep popping in the new data, and then be able to have it populate just the information I need for those quarters, month by month, and then also be able to review and reconcile to make sure there were no mistakes, the journal entries are correct and still hold, and then, tie out the year so that we can submit it for the accounts, versus it being all of these like separate spreadsheets from separate months in different places. It's a
Right.
lot harder to reconcile that. So it's really just creating that process over time. Where on the fiat side, you really don't have to do that. It's like in a statement, there's a beginning balance and ending balance. It's pretty straightforward, easy to reconcile. And so there's just some new methods on having to be organized myself personally in a new way, and then to make sense of these documents. And that's another thing Anthony's been super pivotal in helping, is designing some of these spreadsheets so that they're internally better for the process that we're doing, so we can save more time, because that's really what it comes down to. Like when you talk about AI, and it's like, really, I would love from my industry as bookkeepers to become more efficient through these different tools and methods, so that we're not so heavily focused on this data entry and getting everything in, because a lot
Yeah.
of that can be automated. Like the numbers that come into the system are the numbers that are going to go and stay in the system. It's
Yeah.
really just about putting them in the right place. And if we can automate that, then our industry, for the Bitcoin side of the bookkeeping, that could be more focused and fine-tuned and nuanced, and then again become more automated. And then people in my role can focus more on the things that are more important, like you're saying, the client advisory services and some of the higher level pieces that our people in our position can do as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we have to probably mention, I know you and I have talked about, or I'm pretty sure we've talked about this, the back and forth that is unique to you, to your all's firm, between the client and yourself on, hey, so and so, tell me what this was. What was
Yeah.
this transaction? Whereas, I think a normal bookkeeper is like, wait, what are you talking about? I just checked the Chase bank statement, and it tells me, or at least it gets me close, right? And if I don't know, I can Google the whole string, and it will tell me, is this a restaurant or is it a gas station, whatever it might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess talk to the audience about, what does that process look like today? And I guess, have you and Anthony, have you all discussed any kind of internal solution to try to streamline that with, with the tooling that you have today, to make that, I guess, a bit more efficient?
Yeah. I mean, to for context, for people that maybe that don't do this, is we've kind of given away our responsibility in this sense in the fiat world, where these institutions will provide that credit card information in the memo. Even as horrible as it is sometimes, where it's just gobbledygook and makes no sense in the memo as to what it is, of what that transaction was, up to very precise, and you can tell what that transaction was for and put it somewhere. In Bitcoin, there are no memos. Some of the wallets will have them, but they don't always transfer over to what I would see on my side. And so then it's always this process of, I just have raw data of ins and outs. And then there's, transaction IDs. And if you don't know about what those are, then you might be missing how to look at that. Um, as well as fees that'll happen when you're sending money out, especially if it's on chain. And so if you're actually making a transfer, then you would see it on a different export of somewhere else, with the same date, but it's going to be a different Bitcoin amount, and it's definitely going to be a different US dollar amount. And
Yep.
so tracking those between accounts is always really fun.
Yeah.
You're doing a just this audit process essentially. And so I guess we're working into that place of how do you actually make it a better way to communicate with the client outside of just sending spreadsheets back and forth. That really it feels archaic nowadays.
Yeah.
And so we are using a client management software, but it's still kind of the same process, and haven't really been able to figure out how to fix that yet. But I would love to, because I know that's a huge piece of inefficiency for me to have to take data that the client might already have, and that they might have already written their own notes for. They just gave me the raw version, not the
Yeah.
one with their notes. Um, and then I have to take that and make it easier for them to understand what I'm asking for and digest. So it's another spreadsheet,
Yeah.
and then give them a copy, and then they're going to have to fill that out, and then give me another copy back, and then we're dealing with all of these different copies of data, because then you have that privacy side too. Not everybody wants to use Google Docs and have their UTXOs sitting on a spreadsheet somewhere in a cloud.
Yep.
So we use, encrypted cloud services. Eventually, we'll want to move towards self-hosting services that are encrypted as well. But then it's like, how do you fix that problem of a single source of truth that both of you can edit at the same time in a privacy-oriented way? And so that's what we hope for and want. Just haven't been able to get that bottleneck out of the system yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we should talk a little bit about the privacy. I know it's not exactly bookkeeping specific, but I know your all's firm is extremely focused on privacy. And I'm sure anyone, or not anyone, but a lot of people listening to what you just said, and I know it even crossed my mind. It's like, oh, well, just do a Google sheet, right? And I think maybe speak to why you all are not, maybe a little bit more depth of why you're really trying to be focused on the privacy, and why maybe more practitioners should be looking into their tooling and considering reasons why they maybe shouldn't be giving Google all the data on their clients.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest part is if/when Bitcoin succeeds in the way that I think many Bitcoiners know it will one day, whenever that is.
Mhm.
That these amounts that may seem trivial in terms of Sats or Bitcoin, they seem trivial now, will be worth a lot more in the future. And we know that the data companies sell and harvest every bit of data they can. And so there's kind of both sides. Like, one side is like, well, a lot of these are companies that are submitting their taxes. So like, that information is already kind of accessible in some sense, but it's kind of through this facade of like, what's being reported is US dollars for the most part. So it's not really like actual amounts of Bitcoin
Yeah.
that's there, I guess, depending on the company. Um, and then the other side is that, like, why not have privacy by default? And that's kind of like where I personally align, as well as you said, the business does as well. It's like, how can we do that in a conscious way that allows the user to keep their privacy? And we have clients that share Google spreadsheets with us, and that's how they do it. So we'll do the same thing with them. And other ones where they might be in the middle, and we're kind of guiding them to, like, hey, use our encrypted cloud software that allows you to have basically like an encrypted version of Dropbox instead of popping it in the email. Because you can use Proton, which is encrypted, but if it's not encrypted on both sides, then you've got this
Right.
document that's only encrypted on one side of the communication. And so there's kind of all different variances of where they're coming from. And I think it's just good to do that. And the same thing with AI. We use Maple AI. We try not to use any centralized AI services that do not use that type of encryption method, because we don't want that information to be used in the future at some time, for the growth of the business. But each of us kind of has our different angle that we're looking from, and I think privacy by default is kind of the beginning of it. But then there's also constant trade-offs depending on the scenario as to what we need to consider, because you don't always want to go straight to that as the top and make yourself less efficient, or make the client experience not as good simply because you're trying to hold that flag so hard. So it's definitely a balance.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think there's one other kind of like technical thing that I was just thinking through that you'd mentioned. I just want to touch on it a little bit more. Talk through for other accountants and bookkeepers how you are thinking about transfers, how you just described. Like, I assume there's nothing in QuickBooks that allows you to, I know you could like match that, hey, this went from this account or this wallet to this wallet, right? But there's that different USD, and the difference is the fee. I mean, have you found that QuickBooks does a good job of allowing you to track that as like a transfer? And then also, do you then have to go update, I guess, a spreadsheet to show, hey, there's less Sats now, but they still have those Sats that are still here, they have the same cost basis? Or is that too in the weeds for for this conversation?
I mean, I could try to explain it. I think I know what you're saying, that like, the information is going to be outside of the accounting system. And I would start there of there's these various Bitcoin wallets, so to speak, whether they're exchanges or wallets, and money's going in and out of each of them. And sometimes there are transfers between. So having to like match and find which ones are those transfers. And then it's almost trying to mirror that manually into QuickBooks or another accounting software. But now in US dollar terms. So really that like US dollar terms conversion is happening. The flow of it is being figured out, and then the US dollar amount is being figured out, and then that's what's going to be transferred into the accounting software. And so you can do just general transfers between bank accounts, kind of in the same way fiat is running. Um, Eventually, basically, what happens is you start running into some discrepancies because you can't reconcile in the same way. They're not really like hard numbers, which is kind
Hmm.
of another problem, right? Everything is a ratio of BTC to USD, and there's multiple sources as to what that dollar amount is, which is another problem. Is a lot of these exchanges and wallets don't actually record the US dollar amount at the time of the transaction, which means the conversion is always off in some sense.
Yeah.
And so we're having to recreate that afterwards within a spreadsheet. And usually it's like end of day US dollar price. So it's close, but it's not the same thing. So you eventually, because of this like foundational piece that most of these softwares are not tracking the actual US dollar amount, or that the conversion that they're doing for you, right? Like they're doing that as the service of calling out, saying, this is the price. I created an invoice. I'm receiving or I'm sending. And then they don't like tag it in their exports as to what it actually is. So inevitably, we're going to have numbers that don't reconcile out. And that's where it basically falls into the realized or unrealized gain, is basically the month end capture to say, maybe some of these are going to be bank fees and we'll track those as we see them, or, transaction fees. But then the
Hmm.
rest of it is really just going to be some fluctuation in US dollar amount. And then that's how we'll kind of like reconcile at the month end to basically put it into that last bucket of like, it's not worth it to chase sats or chase pennies for
Right.
everybody's time. You really just got to put it into those types of categories.
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, I think that was most of my questions. This is great. I think that it's evident based on the conversations we've had, and even this one, it's like we're early, right?
Yes.
The tooling will come, and also things could help in the future from a policy standpoint. For example, if we got rid of cap gains, that would probably make our lives 10 times more easier.
Yes.
So we'll see. Joe and I, we're going out to DC next week, so we'll see. Maybe we can slip that into the big beautiful bill. I know that's a stretch goal, but we can dream. We're dreamers as Bitcoiners. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, end it here and let you, yeah, give us any final closing thoughts on what you might say to this audience. And then, yeah, where, if someone has a referral, or they're just a business owner, what's the best way to get in contact with you all to get an engagement started?
Yeah, totally. Let's see, to close off, like I think part of the inspiration too, as well, is like obviously working with Satoshi Pacioli, get to see like the groundwork of the industry in a sense, like being at the hub of a lot of sprouting businesses to see like what's being built in this new industry. And then working at the space in Denver, our treasury is pretty much all in Bitcoin. And so Dylan, our treasurer, is kind of pioneering ways to be able to track that. You can actually go to treasury.denver.space. It'll show you our live treasury. It might take a little while to load because it's self-hosted, but that's part of part of the deal.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to be in both of those worlds and see through this accounting lens as to how it's happening, like in the community sense here in Denver at the space, as well as like as the businesses in the industry as a whole, with Satoshi Pacioli, and see these different methods of like full on Bitcoin, barely any USD, being
Yeah.
able to track that and manage it, as well as the other side that's like mostly fiat, but also like building this Bitcoin balance over time, and some not touching it at all, just using it as a savings. Others like using it for contract payments across the world. And so it's very cool to see like this huge variance of different ways of being able to use Bitcoin. And I'd say for like people that are, you know, in our industry and maybe just touching Bitcoin and kind of curious about it. For me personally, I think that was surprising for me is before I got this job, I actually was kind of like exhausted by bookkeeping. I wasn't really feeling it anymore. It was kind of drudgery and didn't know if I needed to go into a different industry or choose something else. But I knew I loved Bitcoin. And then when I started this position, just really brought that passion back and that excitement back.
Mm.
Because I was so excited about what Bitcoin was, what it can be, the community, the people that I was starting to get in contact with, and then now being able to work with companies in the Bitcoin industry that I knew about before I got this job was like one of the most exciting things. And then, you know, learning all these new ways in which you can do stuff. It's really like the sandbox is like cleared, and you have this
Right.
like, or this new canvas essentially is there, and you have like all this ability, like your point earlier of it's kind of a double-edged sword where it's like there's this huge list of all these things you could do, and it can be a little bit overwhelming and you can't get to them all. But if we get enough people who are interested in this, we could begin to start to tackle all these new things and create all these new tools and get to new places. So there's a lot of possibility ahead if you're willing to you know, get into the details and try some new things and be willing to learn and you know, bring your own perspective into this, because everybody's going to see something different about what's not built yet. Case in point, like Tyler Stevens here at the space that did the Undermine event of capturing heat from Bitcoin miners. And we had 70 people from out of town that flew here because they were so interested in the topic, and 140 people total for the event. It went way higher than we thought.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things. He had a heat engineer background, got into Bitcoin, got interested in mining, and saw this thing that no one else saw. And there's so much possibility in our industry for that as well. So, and closing up, so like to get in contact with us, SatoshiPacioli.com. That's SATOSHI, and the Pacioli is PACIOLI.com. We're on Twitter, we're on Noster, and then we newly have a Substack as well. If you want to check that out for some of our more recent content, we'll be blasting things out every week.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty. Well, I appreciate you jumping on. You are the backbone of the Bitcoin economy. So unsung hero. I think everyone who's a Bitcoin just works in Bitcoin, everyone should go thank your bookkeeper, especially if it's Joey. So
Thank you.
yeah, man. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, I'll keep you on for just a second after this. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Absolutely.